Page 167 continued. In the Elizabethan age, the idea of the novel grows more definite. In Sidney's Arcadia, 1580, a romance of chivalry, the pastoral setting, at least, is generally true to nature. Our credulity is not taxed, as in the old romances, by the continued appearances of magic or miracles, and the characters, though idealized till they become tiresome, occasionally give the impression of being real men and women. In Bacon's The New Atlantis, 1627, we have the story of the discovery by mariners of an unknown country inhabited by a superior race of men more civilized than ourselves, an idea which had been used by More in his Utopia in 1516. These two books are neither romances nor novels in the strict sense, but studies of social institutions. They use the connected story as a means of teaching moral lessons and of bringing about needed reforms, and this valuable suggestion has been adopted by many of our modern writers in the so-called problem novels and novels of purpose. Nearer to the novel is Lodge's romantic story of Rosalind, Rosalynde, which was used by Shakespeare in As You Like It. This was modelled upon the Italian novella or short story which became very popular in England during the Elizabethan age. In the same age, we have introduced into England the Spanish picaresque novel from Picaro, a knave or rascal, which at first was kind of burlesque on the medieval romance, and which took for its hero some low scoundrel or outcast instead of a knight, and followed him through a long career of scandals and villainies. One of the earliest types of the picaresque, picaresque novel in English is Nash's The Unfortunate Traveller, or The Life of Jack Wilton, 1594, which is also a forerunner of the historical novel, since its action takes place during the gorgeous interview between Henry VIII and the King of France on the field of the cloth of gold. In all these short stories and picaresque novels, the emphasis was laid not so much on life and character as on the adventures of the hero, and the interest consisted largely in wondering what would happen next, and how the plot would reveal or end. The same method is employed in all trashy novels, and it is especially the bane of many modern story writers. This excessive interest in adventures or incidents for their own sake and not for their effect on character is what distinguishes the modern adventure story from the true novel. In the Puritan age, we approach still nearer to the modern novel, especially in the words of Bunyan. And as the Puritan always had laid emphasis on character, stories appeared having a definite moral purpose. Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress in 1678 differs from the Fairy Queen and from all other medieval allegories in this important respect, that the characters, far from being bloodless abstractions, are but thinly disguised men and women. Indeed, many a modern man reading the story of Christian has found in it the reflections of his own life and experience. In the life and death of Mr. Badman, we have another and even more realistic study of a man as he was in Bunyan's day. These two striking figures, that is Christian and Mr. Badman, belong among the great characters of English fiction. Bunyan's good work, his keen insight, his delineation of character, and his emphasis upon the moral effects of the individual action was carried on by Addison and Steele some 30 years later. The character of Sir Roger de Coverley is a real reflection of English country life in the 18th century, and with Steele's domestic sketches in The Tatler, The Spectator, and The Guardian, we definitely cross the borderland that lies outside the romance and enter the region of character only when character study, where the novel has its beginning. The discovery of modern novel. Notwithstanding this long story history of fiction to which we have called attention, it is safe to say that until the publication of Richardson's Pamela in 1740, no true novel had appeared in any literature. By the true novel, we mean simply a work of fiction which relates the story of plain human being under stress emotion, which depends for its interest not on incident or adventure, but on its truth to nature. A number of English novelists, Goldsmith, Richardson, Fielding, Smollett, Sterne, all seem to have seized upon the idea of reflecting life as it is in the form of a story, and to have developed it simultaneously. The result was an extraordinary awakening of interest, especially among the people who had never before been greatly concerned with literature. We are to remember that in previous periods the number of readers was comparatively small, and that with the exception of a few letters like Langland and Bunyan, everyone authors in the 18th century, the spread of education and the appearance of newspapers and magazines led to an immense increase in the number of people assumed a foremost place in English literature, life and history. These new readers and this new powerful middle class had no classic tradition to hamper this. They cared little for the opinions of Dr. Johnson and the famous literary club, and so far as in the 18th century the spread of education and the appearance of newspapers and magazines led to an immense increase in the number of readers, and at the same time the middle class people assumed a foremost place in English life and history. These new readers and this new powerful middle class had no classic tradition to hamper them. They cared little for the opinions of Dr. Johnson and the famous literary club, and so far as they read fiction at all, they apparently took little interest in the exaggerated romances of impossible heroes and the picaresque stories of intrigue and villainy which had interested the upper classes. Some new type of literature was demanded, and this new type must express the new ideal of the 18th century, namely the value and the importance of the individual life. So the novel was born, expressing though in a different way, exactly the same ideals of personality and the dignity of common life which were later proclaimed in the American and in the French Revolution, and were welcomed with rejoicing by the poets of the Romantic Revival. To tell men not about knights or kings or types of heroes, but about themselves in the guise of plain men and women, about their own thoughts and motives and struggles, and the result of actions upon their own characters. This was the purpose of our first novelists. The eagerness with which their chapters were read in England and the rapidity with which their work was copied abroad show how powerfully the new discovery appealed to readers everywhere. Before we consider the work of these writers who first developed the modern novel, we must glance in the work of a pioneer, Daniel Defoe, whom we place among the early novelists for the simple reason that we know not how else to classify him. Daniel Defoe, 1661 to 1731. To Defoe is often given the credit for the discovery of the modern novel, but whether or not he deserves that honor is an open question. Even a casual reading of Robinson Crusoe, 1719, which generally heads the list of modern fiction, shows that this exciting tale is largely an adventure story rather than the study of human character, which Defoe probably intended it to be. Young people still read it as they might a dime novel, skipping its moralizing passages and hurrying on to more adventures, but they seldom appreciate the excellent mature resources or mature reasons which banish the dime novel to a secret place in the haymow, while Crusoe hangs proudly on the Christmas tree or holds an honored place on the family bookshelf. Defoe's apparition of Mrs. Veal, Memoirs of a Cavalier, and the Journal of the Plague Year are such mixtures of fact, fiction, and credulity that they defy classifications, while the other so-called novels like Captain Singleton, John Moll Flanders, and Roxana are but little better than picaresque picaresque stories with a deal of unnatural moralizing and repentance added for the puritanical effect. In Crusoe, Defoe brought the realistic adventure story to a very high stage of its development, but his works hardly deserve to be classed as true novels, which must subordinate incident to the faithful portrayal of human life and character. Defoe was the son of a London butcher named Foe, F-O-E, and kept his family name until he was 40 years of age, when he added the aristocratic prefix with which we have grown familiar. The events of his busy 70 years of life, in which he passed through all extremes, from poverty to wealth, from prosperous brickmaker to starveling journalist, from Newgate prison to immense popularity and royal favour, are obscure enough in details, but 4 facts stand out clearly, which help the reader to understand the character of his work. First, Defoe was a jack at all trades as well as a writer. His interest was largely with the working classes, and notwithstanding many questionable practices, he seemed to have some continued purpose of educating and uplifting the common people. End of page 168, now page 169. This partially accounts for the enormous popularity of his works and for the fact that they were criticized by literary men as being fit only for the kitchen. Second, he was a radical nonconformist in religion and was intended by his father for the independent ministry. The Puritan zeal for reform possessed him, and he tried to do by his pen what Wesley was doing by his preaching, without, however, having any great measure of the latter's sincerity or singleness of purpose. The zeal for reform marks all his numerous works and accounts for the moralizing to be found everywhere. Third, Defoe was a journalist and a pamphleteer with a reporter's eye for the picturesque and a newspaper's man instinct for making a good story. He wrote on immense number of pamphlets, People and magazine articles, conducted several papers. One of the most popular, the Review, being issued from prison, and the fact that they often blew hot and cold upon the same question was hardly noticed. Indeed, so extraordinarily interesting and plausible were Defoe's articles that he generally managed to keep employed by the journalistic career lasting half a century. Accounts for his direct, simple narrative style, which holds us even now by its intense reality. To Defoe's genius, we are also indebted for 2 discoveries. the interview and the leading editorial, both of which are still in daily use in our best newspapers. The fourth fact to remember is that Defoe knew prison life and thereby hangs a tale. In 1702, Defoe published a remarkable pamphlet called The Shortest Way to the Dissenters, supporting the claims of the free churches against the high flyers, that is, the Tories and the Anglicans. In a vein of grim humor which recalls the Swifts' modest proposal, Defoe advocated hanging all dissenting ministers and sending all members of the Free Church into exile, and so ferociously realistic was the same satire that both the dissenters and the Tories took the author literally. Defoe was tried, found guilty of seditious libel, and sentenced to be fined, to stand 3 days in the pillory, and to be imprisoned. Hardly had the sentence been pronounced when Defoe wrote his hymn to the pillory. Hail, holographic state machinery contrived to punish fancy in a set of doggerel verses ridiculing his prosecutors, which Defoe, with a keen eye for advertising, scattered all over London.